Next speaker is Chris Baugh, Assistant General Secretary of PCS.
It's a great pleasure to accept the invitation on behalf of PCS and bring solidarity from my union and to pay tribute to the work of the NSSN, not just because it shows such wisdom in deciding to close today's conference at 2:30, but because of the important work that I think all the speakers have referred to, which is that the NSN plays such a pivotal role in organising activists, the network of activists, not just within individual unions, but across the trade union movement. And reference has been made to the importance of showing solidarity for any group of workers taking action. And the NSS Bulletin is essential reading, and its ever-presence on picket lines, again, I think, is an enormous credit to the important role that it plays. And to those unions, my own union included, all of those unions represented on this platform, those unions, I would point out, that have shown a willingness to organise a fight on behalf of their members, that it's the NSSN that brings us together, that creates a platform for the much needed discussion that we need to have as a trade union movement. How do we act as a lever on the TUC and all of those unions that stand as an obstacle to mobilise and fighting back in general? And if, as others have referred, if the TUC continues to stand in the way of an organised, coordinated response of those unions prepared to take action collectively, then we need to plan and develop our own agenda that operates, if necessary, outside of the scope of the TUC. The only way we're going to apply pressure upon them is if we take matters into our own hands and start organising.
Well, our conference in May agreed to conduct a national statutory ballot. It's in many ways the most important membership ballot I think that we've run in our 20-year history. And this is about basically forcing the government to negotiate properly on the basis of our claim, of the Treasury remit that sets the parameters for the pay rates in the civil service, and to talk to them about restoring the right of PCS to bargain with the Treasury on behalf of our entire membership. But of equal importance, the ballot is also to send a powerful signal that if they don't negotiate, we will be preparing a programme of national and targeted action to force them back to start talking to the unions for the first time, really, since the early 90s.
And we need to halt, let's face it, all the speakers have referred in their own way, in their own sectors, the general attack on the British working class from the Reagan-Thatcher years onwards, from the 80s, an absolute onward assault. And don't let anybody tell us that that assault has been stopped. It continues to roll on. And whatever language the Tories and others use about austerity, there is no respite, not just for PCS members, for British workers.
Well, first and foremost, we're increasingly confident that we're going to win a decisive vote in the ballot of members that will give us the mandate to call on the government to negotiate, and if they won't, to organise the necessary industrial action to force them. And one of the reasons why I think we're increasingly confident is the contemptuous treatment of the civil service by the government. If you look around, you find settlements in excess of 3% with the Scottish Government. You look, although the settlements are not perfect, but money in addition to the 1.1% pay cap in local government and the NHS, expecting a series of pay review bodies, all to recommend increases in excess of 3%. And I think the government's contemptuous attitude has really fuelled a deep anger amongst our members, and combined with arguably the highest level of activity within the union since the pension strike in 2001, I think we're increasingly confident of not just getting a decisive vote for action, but for smashing the threshold.
And that attack accelerated since the crash. And of course, we saw the high watermark of collective action around pensions in 2011. We also saw the terrible climb down. And where does that get you? Of course, it simply highlights that any attempts at moderation and a conciliatory approach to a government of this character simply invites even deeper cuts in the civil service, deeper cuts in local government, and deeper cuts in the NHS and the onward march of the private sector. And it's effectively, since that climb down, left The serious unions effectively left to fight alone. And reference has been made to the recent government report, which again, you know, at one level, you see, density now, the lowest level since 1995. You see strike, days lost in strikes at the lowest since records began. You've effectively got a trade union movement of over 6 million workers out of an estimated workforce of over 30 million. But as Linda alluded to, and as somebody once said, we've been reading the obituary of British trade unionism since 6 agricultural labourers first gathered under a tree at Tolpuddle. And those strike figures, of course, don't begin to tell the real story. The relentless attacks on paid jobs and conditions, the attempt to place struggle within the straitjacket of anti-union legislation. But this has produced a huge and massive sense of grievance that exists in every workplace and exists in every working class community in the UK. And I just want to highlight several examples that have proved an inspiration to PCS. It's important to qualify it by saying, as Linda and others have said, there's a whole host of struggles and battles concealed from view that don't get highlighted, that reveal the anger and the sense of grievance that I've talked about. But I want to talk and refer, of course, to the tenacious struggle of the RMT over a number of years fighting to defend the safety of the public, the skillful and brilliant campaign of the CWU and the postal workers that use the enormous latent power of their membership, as Terry said, using the workplace power and the power of the rank and file with a skillful leadership to secure an historic deal on pensions and a number of important concessions. And I also want to highlight the struggle in the UCU, the massive upsurge of membership activity that transformed not just the direction of that strike, but has transformed that union, and again gives another illustration of the importance and what is possible when members assert themselves and reclaim control of their own union. And the Bakers Union, you know, small in number, but the Bakers Union, I think, in many respects leads the way in one of the fundamental tasks of the British trade union movement, to reach out to the millions of young, super-exploited workers out there who, in my opinion, have been neglected by the British official movement for far too long. And all of this has been an inspiration to PCS, who've had to contend with an unprecedented attack on pay terms and conditions, and at the same time, an unprecedented attack on union rights itself. And I'm proud that we've defied the attempt to break us, and we continue as a union to fight on and support our members in dispute, but not just waiting for requests for support. We've launched a national pay ballot to win a decisive vote to force the government to negotiate in a way they haven't done since they scrapped national pay bargaining in the early 90s. And if they're not prepared to negotiate, to look to secure a mandate, to organise a programme of national and targeted, sustained industrial action to force the government to talk properly, to address our legitimate concerns. This is in many ways the most important membership ballot that PCS has been engaged in its 20-year history. And you just look, yet again, it's the usual story. The civil service treated as the poor relations, caricatured as a bunch of Whitehall mandarins, treated again with contempt by the government towards its own employees. You look at the money that's been released in other areas, imperfect in many respects, the deals in local government and, of course, in NHS. But we point to the extra money to our members in Scottish Government, who get an average 5% increase, and our lowest paid get increases of over 12%. You look at all of the pay review bodies, many of which are about to report, all of which we expect to recommend increases well in excess of the 1% pay cap in senior civil service, in military and in other areas of the public sector. And the offer of talks that the Tories and the Treasury initially offered to the civil service unions have been reduced to farce. No extra funding, no talks and negotiations on our pay claim, no talks on the Treasury pay remit, just issued contemptuously, despite conceding that they would talk to us in the first place, and vague offers of talks in the future about restoring our right to negotiate the pay of all of our members. And you have to ask yourself the question, why this special treatment? Well, of course, we know this government doesn't like PCS particularly. We also know this government doesn't like the civil service particularly. But one of the reasons we think they've thrown down the gauntlet is this government doesn't think that we can achieve the 50% threshold. Well, their contemptuous attitude, the hardline stance that they've taken, the blatant contempt the government have shown for their own workers has generated a level of activity in our union that we've not seen since the pensions fight. A return, as Terry said, to workplace activity. Combined, it should be said, with a massive sense of anger of our members. And in that context, we're confident that we're going to defy this government yet again. We're going to win that mandate, win that decisive vote, a massive step forward for PCS, not just in our fight on pay, but a massive step forward in our fight against job cuts, office closures, the stream of attacks on pay terms and conditions, the onward threat of privatisation. All of this will help us, in our view, rebuild the activist base in the union, reassert the power of our groups and our branches and our activists, rebuild not just the power of PCS, but alongside, I think, all the speeches have touched on this crucial and fundamental point, that alongside our sister unions, if the TUC is not prepared to provide the leadership, then we need to plan and work together on how we mobilise the massive latent power of the British trade union movement and use that power in the interests of our class. Comrades, thanks for listening.
Often there are circumstances where a union, not least in recent times, has found that it has to fight alone, and if necessary that's what PCS will do, and it's why we're drawing up plans for national and coordinated action. But I think all public sector workers and PCS members are no different. Understand that if you're in a position to coordinate action more widely, it gives you much greater leverage and power with the government, not just on your own behalf, but on everybody else's behalf. And we will continue to look around to see and explore the possibilities of joint action with the POA, with the GMB, in the National Health Service, who voted decisively to reject the pay offer. There are pay review bodies that are likely to make recommendations, and the key here is that PCS will continue to do what it can to coordinate the action, and I think I'm really pleased that our union is represented at the NSSN today, because the NSSN has also played a very important role in bringing unions together and exercising a sort of leverage within the TUC to step up and provide the lead and the coordinated response to this government that not just our members but workers in general need.